Hey, Frank Zaylor again. Latest episode, part 4. We've talked about quite a few things on the motor. I'm going to start by talking about intake to exhaust port ratio. If you have your head flowed and it flows 250 on the intake side and blows 200 on the exhaust side, you can ratio that out and it'll give you a ratio if it's 70%, 75%, 80%. And there's been a rule that has been going around for a long, long time that ideally that you want about 75% is an ideal thing, okay? What I'm going to tell you is don't get hung up on those numbers. If you have a well-planned motor and you have a pretty good intake flow, I'm going to use one of my motors, for example, at 700 on a super flow bench. It went 292 at 700 lift, and that was with a 202 valve. It was with a small valve. My exhaust got up to 192 at 600 installed there and would not go past 192. My flow ratio percentage was off, but my efficiency for what the motor was and what I had was pretty much right at 100%. I didn't have nowhere near 700 lift cam in it, but I was making close to 600 horsepower. I think that you can do it with the type of intake and the type of cam that you're using to make it think it's working better than what it is. And it's going to be hard for you to follow this, but I had a friend one time, we did a 400, and I watched on a flow bench. This was a stock set of General Motors heads. They were camel hump heads, and they went 240 on the intake, and that's it. That's all they'd go. It did do 200 on the exhaust, which I was quite impressed with. He put a cam in it that not only I, but a bunch of other people told him that won't work in it. It was Comp Eliminator spec cam. I mean, the duration at 50 was incredible. The center line was way off for a small block. It was like at 114 center line. It was like a nitrous cam for a 434. It was incredibly off. It used a set of 1 3/4 headers, a Holley strip dominator manifold, and an 850 double pumper. Well, lo and behold, the car went 1050s. Okay? So, when I asked a head porter of mine, a good friend of mine that's a professional, why did his car run faster than my car when I had more compression than he did? I had more of this. He said he had a cam that hit right on the nose, and from the pulses from the exhaust and the pulses from the intake, and there's a lot of theory about things. It was actually to a point where it was pulling in and expelling exhaust, making the head work better than what it should have been. Basically making the motor exceed 100% of what it should have done. It far exceeded what it should have done. After that, I didn't put much stock into what flow figures are on a head as far as ratio goes. Now, there's always this numerical chart that you say, okay, well, to make 500 horsepower, you need to have X amount of flow in your intake. and I don't know what it is. I'm just going to throw out a number. To make 500 horsepower, you need 270 CFM of flow. Okay? Sure, you put a basic motor together with your basic parts, and you get your heads, and you know they flow that, and you put it together, and it makes your 500 horsepower. Congratulations. You did exactly what it was supposed to do. Okay? And there's a guy next to you in a stock eliminator car running a 350 with camel hump heads and running the same speed you are, and he's making about 500 horsepower, and you're going, what? How has this happened? It happens because he has gone into an efficiency area that is hard to get to. Okay? I'm not going to tell you and sit here and try to tell you that I know what these efficiency things are. A lot of them are secrets that people just won't release. But what I'm telling you is, don't base everything on what you read about intake versus exhaust. Okay? Because I've seen it. And I've done it. I want to talk real quick about header size. A good friend of mine had a motor that made 603 horsepower on the dyno at 7,000 RPMs, I believe it was. And he got everything tuned, and it made 603. Well, he still had some time left on the dyno, and they had a set of engine 7/8 headers that they use for dyno headers. And he goes, well, if it made this with this, I'm going to take my 1 3/4 off, put the engine 7/8 headers on it, and it should make more horsepower. He put it on, and it made 601 horsepower. Well, when I was talking to him, he said it made less horsepower, and I explained to him, I said, no, it made the same horsepower. You're within the factors of error, okay? Less than 1%, okay? He could have let it cool and dynoed again, and it could have made 605 horsepower. Basically, the main thing that I'm saying is there was no change from running an 1 3/4 with a 3-inch collector to an 1 7/8 header with a 3.5-inch collector on this particular motor. Now, if you put too small of a header on, it's going to change it. Okay, if you have a 400 cubic inch motor and you put an 1 5/8 header on it with a 3-inch collector and it's got tight bends in it and it's small, it's going to affect your horsepower. Is it going to affect it an extreme amount? I doubt it, but it will affect it. Okay? Another thing is, and I just recently saw this on TV, I couldn't believe it myself, was dings and headers. Don't ding a header because it'll take away horsepower and stuff like this. These guys beat the shit out of a header, and it made no difference. Okay? I think if you've got a clearance a header or ding a header, don't worry about it. It's not enough to be concerned with. As long as you got a header that's big enough to run your motor and your RPM range and your horsepower range, you should be fine. Also, this shit about you need a little back pressure to make it work is bullshit. I promise you, on a dyno, in a race motor or a motor that you're going to try to make any kind of horsepower out of, you're going to make maximum horsepower with open headers, or maybe open headers with a small extension on them. Okay? If you put any kind of muffler or what on it, yes, you can increase your low-end torque, but if you got a 4,000 converter and you run this at the track, if you got a 4,000 converter and you make more torque at 3,000 RPMs, what good does that do? It makes no difference how the car runs at 3,000 RPMs, because when you floor it, it's going to be at 4,000 RPMs. So it's irrelevant. With my builds, when I stall my cars, I don't care what it runs at 3,000. I don't care what it runs at 4,000 because it never sees it. My cars are normally at an idle or the wide open throttle. And maybe on the return road, I give it a little bit of gas to get it going. There's a lot of things about intake manifolds. This manifold will run better than that manifold and so on and so forth. And yeah, you might see a 2-4 horsepower difference. This old racer that's really good said, "You know what a manifold does?" And the answer was what? I mean, excuse me, the return was what? And it says it holds up a carburetor. If you put a ton of Ram on a car with 2 4-barrels, because of the sheer height of it, it's going to make more horsepower because it's got a ram air supercharging effect. But as far as a regular manifold goes, you want to do a regular port match and leave it alone. Now, that being said, if you want to take that same manifold and send it off to Jed Spire or a professional to have it completely race ported, you're going to pick up horsepower. Okay? But you goofing around with it a little bit, maybe smoothing it out or something, it ain't changing shit. Okay? Or nothing that you're going to bring up. You'll get more horsepower out of your manifold by adding a 1-inch spacer to it. That's about the easiest way to pick up a little bit of power. Throw a 1-inch spacer on it. If you've got a real, I tell you, the best manifold of all to throw a 1-inch spacer on is Edelbrock Performer RPM. The wake up that does is incredible. And I got one on mine, on this little Malibu that I'm running right now. But anyways, that's it for this lesson. We'll see you the next time.